Here we go. So, in some Thursday morning, I wake up and it's like, I know what I'm going to talk about tonight. Most Thursdays, Catherine starts bothering me around 2 o'clock and says, what am I going to tell them on Facebook that the talk is about tonight? And I say, I don't know. What do you want me to talk about? And then I remembered she sent me this great quote. Was it yesterday? No, it was on Tuesday. Was it yesterday? Okay. Well, she sent me this quote. She texted me this quote. And the quote goes like this. I can read it because I have my phone here for recording. It says, you're right, it was yesterday. The quote says, "The heart longs to be free, and forgiveness is the direct pathway to that freedom. Without it, we can never let others love us, nor can we love others fully. We become like beautiful boats." That's a typo, Miss Mason. "We become like beautiful boats that are tied to the dock. The entire ocean awaits us when we are ready. We start our forgiveness practice with ourselves in mind first. We do it for us. We do it to reclaim what we have lost, and we do it because it's the only thing that makes sense." And this is a quote from a woman named Spring Washam, or something like that, who I've never heard of, but this is really nice. And it kind of brought to mind all the talk about love that I've been doing lately, but I just gave a talk about love a couple of weeks or months ago, so I can't do that. So we're going to talk about forgiveness, and it is definitely directly related to love. And forgiveness is, I don't want to give away the whole talk, but I'll just say this and probably come back to it. Forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for us. So it starts with self-love, and it's about attachment versus letting go. And there is so much in this life and this world to be attached to and to hold grudges for. I was very recently playing a board game with my friends because we're very nerdy. And one of my friends, have you guys played Settlers of Catan? Oh, it's such a great game. If you have not played Settlers of Catan, you're missing out on 30% of life. 30% of my life, at least. So we play this game, and it's like a lot. Do you play well? So if you play well, it's like all about politics and stabbing each other in the back. It's a great game. And one of my friends basically made a move that completely screwed me for the rest of the game. It was like he did this in the first 10% of the game, and I knew that I couldn't win for the rest of the game. And I was thinking about this earlier because not even as a rule, just as my nature has become over the last couple decades, I don't hold on to stuff really, and I don't hold grudges. And it's the way that I've chosen to be. It's the way that I've reprogrammed my mind to work. But when I'm playing Settlers of Catan, I hold on to a grudge like a fiend. And I told him, I hope that this was worth it, because I am literally never going to trust you again in this game. And I held on to it for a while, and then I just stopped caring. It was fine. The game is too long. The game's like 2 or 3 hours. So you got to be able to let it go and just move on. So I'm going to talk more about my success in forgiveness rather than playing board games. The story that comes to mind, I love reading stories from Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. It's one of my favorite books. It's a really simple story. It is the third story. Yes, it's called Is That So? The Zen master Hakuin was praised by his neighbors as one living a pure life. A beautiful Japanese girl whose parents owned a food store lived near him. Suddenly, without any warning, her parents discovered she was with child. This made her parents angry. She would not confess who the man was, but after much harassment, at last named Hakuin. In great anger, the parents went to the master. Is that so? Was all he would say. After the child was born, it was brought to Hakuin. By this time he had lost his reputation, which did not trouble him. But he took very good care of the child. He obtained milk from the neighbors and everything else the little one needed. A year later, the girl mother could stand it no longer. She told her parents the truth. The real father of the child was a young man who worked in the fish market. Of course. The mother and father of the girl at once went to Hakuin to ask his forgiveness, to apologize at length, and to get the child back again. Hakuin was willing. In yielding the child, all he said was, "Is that so?" And it's, that's intense. That's dramatic. And I wonder how many of us in the same situation would just say, "Is that so?" when accepting a child that is not ours to take care of it for a year. And in giving back a child, just, "Is that so?" Like there's not even a moment of, "Why did you do this to me? Like I can't believe you, and now you're going to come back and just take this baby back and like nothing ever happened." There was none of that. It was just, "Is that so?" Like that was it. Just saying, "Is that so?" Just let it go completely. And I think it's very helpful for us to sometimes actually have like a catchphrase that helps us with things like this that we struggle with. So maybe you're struggling with forgiveness, or maybe you're struggling with something else. A lot of times, it was like a question that Catherine asked me last week, right, for question and answer? Or was it 2 weeks ago? It was last week. As you can see, I don't remember when things happened. It's because I'm completely unattached. Because it was a question about like knowing about being okay with thinking that you're right and that everybody else is wrong and that whole process. And what was the catchphrase I gave you? That's interesting, right? That's interesting. And I think that's interesting to just have something that you recognize, this is creeping up on me again. I'm starting to attach to this. I'm starting to get riled up. And I just say to myself, that's interesting. And in saying that's interesting, or is that so, or whatever it is, it can remind us, it can bring us back to a state of consciousness maybe that we were at a better time in life. A lot of times it's important to make big decisions when we're in the best possible state, and to just decide, like, you might decide, you probably have already made this decision, but I'm not going to rob a bank. Pretty much ever in this life, it's just not going to happen. I don't have to wake up and decide I'm going to rob a bank or not. But if you wait to make that decision until you're like, you really need to rob a bank and you really want to rob the bank, you might decide otherwise. But if you've decided already, that's it. And I'm getting a little bit off track here. But you make this decision, and you can decide for yourself, whenever this starts to happen, I'm just going to say this thing to myself. So language is really important. The language is incredibly powerful. And the language of forgiveness can sound like a lot of different things, but the word forgiveness has this power. And just literally saying, "I forgive you," or saying, "I forgive myself," it has an impact, it has a serious impact. And I like this idea every once in a while of doing a meditation on empathy and on basically just like filling your consciousness with a circle of people who you really feel connected to and feel love for and empathize with, and then kind of expanding that circle, and to do the same thing with people who you need to forgive. And it's kind of separate from the kind of meditation that we normally do, where you're trying to just clear your thoughts, but it's a good exercise. And to kind of shift your perspective on people is very useful. And we all have somebody, to some extent, even I have people who I need to forgive, or who I would at least like to forgive. And top of the list is always me. I always need to forgive myself for something. And I do terrible things. to myself. I say terrible things to myself, hardly ever, but every once in a while, and just do stupid things that it's like, I need to just forgive myself for that and just let it go and move on. And it's about acceptance, really, on some level. So if you can start by forgiving yourself and start by accepting whatever that is, then you can move on and forgive other people. If you can't even forgive yourself, it's very difficult to forgive other people. Now, some of us, it's the flip. So some people are really good at forgiving other people, but terrible at forgiving ourselves. So then maybe just look at what you do with other people and see how easily you forgive them, and then say, okay, now it's time for me to apply some of that to myself. And I would say all of us have some degree of difficulty with this, just because it is part of our existence when we live in this state that has attachment. We attach to things and we hold on to them. One of my favorite stories, it's also from Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, but I've told this one enough times I can at least paraphrase it. The two monks that are walking down the road come to a stream, and there's a beautiful woman standing on this side of the stream, and she needs to get across. And so one of the monks just throws her on his shoulder and says, "Come on, girl," and he walks her across the river, and he's like waist deep in the river, and he sets her down on the other side, and then they continue on. And then after like miles, the second monk can't stand it anymore, and he says, "What did you do? Monks were not allowed to talk to women or think about them, let alone touch them." And the second monk said, "Brother, I set her down miles ago, and you're still holding on to her?" And it's like, it's so interesting how we get really dogmatic and really set in our ways, and how that can create attachment. And oftentimes, I'm not saying like go rob a bank, but I'm saying like sometimes what we can do is just let go of what we think has to be the only way of doing something, and just be able to move on. And you experience this in meditation for sure. You're sitting and meditating, and there's something, like maybe it's something that has happened that you really need to forgive that person or yourself for, but we get attached to it, and we keep running this tape over and over and over again in our head. And just simply the act of forgiving and letting go allows us to move on from that. And it is so paralyzing to hold on to this stuff. But if we can let go, we can move on and just be completely free, as that quote said that I read earlier on. This book, Kaya gave this to me, and I read a tiny bit of it and set it aside, and then somebody else gave me a book that was also about sayings of Chuang-Tzu, and I read that one, and I thought, wait a minute, this is the same guy that I had in that other book, and this is a wonderful one. We should get copies of this to sell. Do they sell these anymore?
I don't know. I found it at a secondhand store.
We should go buy as many secondhand copies of this as we can. So, this is, I quote this from time to time because I love the metaphor, if I can find it. I have not found it. Here it is. It's called The Empty Boat. So there's a part in the beginning that I'm going to skip, but he goes on and he says, "If a man is crossing a river and an empty boat collides with his own skiff, even though he be a bad-tempered man, he will not become very angry. But if he sees a man in the boat, he will shout at him to steer clear. If the shout is not heard, he will shout again and yet again, begin cursing, and all because there's somebody in the boat. Yet if the boat were empty, he would not be shouting and not angry." And it's so true. I mean, I have not been in this exact situation where I'm in a boat that gets hit by an empty boat. I have actually been in a boat and I've hit an empty boat myself. I've never been hit by an empty boat. But you can like put yourself in that situation and realize like exactly that is 100% what I would do. If somebody else ran into my boat, I'd be pissed off. But if there was nobody in it, the boat just like sailed in on the river, or I ran into it myself, it's stupid to get angry at that. But is there really a big difference between those two things? And I mean on a cosmic level, but also just like in the way that you want to handle it, right? Do we really want to treat those two situations so differently? Because it really is just an excuse for us to be indignant and to hold on to and refuse to forgive. But if we have this perceived slight, somebody does something to us that just we can't get beyond, we have to recognize that is because there's somebody in our boat and we're perceiving that there's somebody in the other boat. But if you can empty either boat, or even better yet would be if you could empty both boats and recognize that is the true nature of things. The you being in the boat, by the way, is the ego, and the other person being in the boat is your perception by your ego of that person. It's not like, well, that person's in their boat because of their ego. You didn't worry about their ego. You are concerned with yours, and you have the ability to set that aside. You can't necessarily empty the other person's boat except in your own mind. So this I love, because if we exist in this kind of state on a regular basis, forgiveness is not even easy. It just happens automatically. And rather than us having to see forgiveness as something we really have to like gear up for and like psych ourselves up for and get ready for and like do all this work to be able to forgive this person, it's like, what if it just happened automatically? That's it. Another similar example to this was, can you give me water, man? I was walking down the street a couple years ago. I won't be able to finish this story without this. I got something in my throat. Let me edit this part out. If you're live, you got to see it. Wait, I need one more. Just leave it here with me. So, I forgive you, whatever's in my throat. I was walking down the street and I saw this car pull up behind another car. And the first car is just like waiting there behind the one that was already there. And then they just lay on the horn. Ah! And the person who was sitting in the car in front throws open the door. She runs out and she's like screaming bloody murder at this guy who's in his car. And both people are very upset. But if like the first guy, if the person who drove up had come up to a parked car, it would have been pretty ridiculous for him to lay on the horn, right? Because nothing doing. It's not going to help the situation. You just kind of go around it, right? If you approach the car and you recognize that it's empty, then there is nothing the whole situation is dissolved before it even begins. You literally just go like this. And that's it. Rather than all of this emotion and anger and then necessary forgiveness later on that comes up. So what if every circumstance that you come across like this, you can recognize, like, I'm not even talking about avoiding it. I'm talking about, like, I come up to this car and I recognize that it's empty. And I am, from the very beginning, I am dealing with this car as it is in its reality, an empty car. If we have this connection to reality, we recognize that there's very little that it is necessary to get that pissed off about and to hold on to and to have that kind of interaction with in our lives, in our world. Yeah, that's not really what we do, right? We get in the line at the DMV and everybody in the DMV is personally responsible for this line. Like, I cannot believe that all these other jerks showed up the same day that I need to renew my license. And that's saying nothing about the idiot on the other end of the desk who's taking their sweet time and all of this stuff. It's like that's how we relate to things. But if we go up to this line and we recognize that, all these people are just in the same situation as we are, and that's just the way that you perceive things from the beginning, none of that boils up in your consciousness. So this is something that I've worked hard at for a long time, many years, and I would not say that I'm perfect at it, because obviously I get pissed off when I play Settlers of Catan. But for the most part, this is it. Like, I will be driving and sitting in traffic, and I recognize that all of these cars are here, like at a standstill or going slowly, and I'm sure some of them are not paying attention to what they're doing, but for the most part, we're all just kind of here in the same world doing the same thing. And it's not even just that it does no good to get pissed off at it, it's that it doesn't even occur to me to get pissed off at it. And it also helps that I have designed my life to not have a lot of traffic in it in the first place. I don't really drive during rush hour, so I feel very bad for all of you guys. But it's just like it's a non-thing for me. And that's not an accident. It's not just like I happened to enjoy traffic. I used to hate it all the time. I used to hate it as much as anybody. But I decided, I'm going to use this as an opportunity. I'm going to practice like Tai Chi. I'm going to practice sitting up straight and breathing from my diaphragm and turn this into like a sitting meditation while my eyes are open, paying attention to the road, because I'm not going to be the cause of other traffic. Or I use this as an opportunity to listen to an audiobook or something like that. Turn it into a positive thing, or just recognize, as soon as that thought is coming in that's going to turn into a boulder that's rolling down or a snowball that gets bigger and bigger, I just recognize it right away and just let it go. And it's, again, it's not perfect, but it is just the way that I've trained my brain to work. And it is way easier to just recognize it in the very beginning before it even turns into that kind of negativity, and to just let it go right out the other side. It's like it comes in this side of my consciousness and just slips right out the other end. Just like remembering when stuff happened. This is what we practice in meditation. We practice being able to recognize a thought as soon as it comes and then be able to let it go. And you should not let go of every single thought that you have in life, because some stuff needs thinking about. But you want the ability to do that. And so we practice that in meditation. I sit, and a thought comes up, and I recognize that's a thought, I'm getting attached to it, and I let it go. And then the next one I try to catch earlier and earlier until it's just like, it's not like I sit and never have any thoughts, but the thoughts only stay for a moment and then they go, and then there's more space in between those thoughts. So, forgiveness is very much the same as this. When we sit and meditate, you don't just think, don't think. You use something to focus on, and that allows that other thing to go, right? So what do we focus on when we're sitting and meditating? The breath. And you focus on the breath, your mind wanders to something else, you feel some kind of attachment, and then you let it go by coming back to the breath. And you've trained yourself to come back to the breath. So forgiveness. What do you focus on in order to let that go? In order to let go of this attachment, in order to let go of this thing that you're so certain you're right to be pissed off about and hold on to forever. An option would be love. And I told some of you guys, I went to a wonderful service on Sunday and heard this great talk by this monk, and he was talking about love and forgiveness, and he was saying that everything else that we experience in life and everything else that takes us away from love, it's all just a distraction from love. That is really most of our day, and most of the things that we encounter and deal with is just distraction. All the stuff that seems so important, it's simply a distraction. It's a distraction from our connection with our true selves. It's a distraction from love. And you can recognize that whatever this thing is that needs to be forgiven, that's a distraction. And so you can simply let it go by just returning to love. And you might be listening to this talk and thinking like, yeah, I agree, that's all good, Stephen, but sometimes I really deserve to be angry and I deserve to hold on to this. Okay, you might ask yourself if that's really true. But certainly there are things that if we just completely forget about and let it fester, then it's turning into repression. It's turning into like, I'm ignoring it, but really I need to deal with it at some point. That's different. Because if it's something that you cannot let go because it needs to be dealt with, then you need to deal with it. But I'm talking about, this is something that is really just a petty thing that I'm holding on to. And really most of it is just petty stuff that we hold on to. You let it go by just coming back to love. So we're going to practice getting our minds in this kind of state when we're meditating today. We're going to practice just coming back to the breath and being able to let go instantly of any other thought that comes in. Sit comfortably.